Late summer, 1945. The war in the Pacific was in its brutal final breaths. Across the ocean, the world held its breath, watching island after island fall, cities burn, and empires collapse. But there was one story no one ever told, one unit no one ever listed, and one mission the U.S. Marine Corps never formally recorded. It began with 12 men, young, steady-eyed Marines hardened by years of island combat. They had survived Guadalcanal, Peleliu, Okinawa. They had seen what war does to men. But none of them were prepared for what waited in the mountains of rural Honshu. Their orders were simple on paper: reconnaissance and communication disruption, a sterile line typed in a faded operations ledger. But the truth was stranger. Their landing wasn't logged. Their squad roster vanished. Their commanding officer's name appears nowhere in U.S. archives. They were dropped at night by a small patrol boat, miles from any known battle line. No cheering liberation crowds, no resistance fighters greeting them. Just whispering bamboo and the steady hum of cicadas that seemed to fall silent as soon as the Marines stepped ashore. They trekked inland toward an isolated farming village said to host a hidden Imperial signal station. But that was only the official briefing. The diary pages that survived hinted at something else, something nobody at command wanted recorded. Private First Class Daniel Harlan wrote the first entry: "Locals watching from fields. Won't approach. Lieutenant says stay alert. Mountains feel wrong, like something's listening." The next: "Noise in the trees last night. Thought it was a deer. Not so sure now." And the last legible note: "Not alone here." On the sixth day, radio contact ceased. No SOS. No gunfire recorded. Just static, then a single phrase lost beneath crackling interference. The squad never returned. The paperwork? Buried. The war ended. The world moved on. But the mountains didn't forget, and neither did the quiet village that had seen 12 American Marines march toward the forest and never walk out again. Years passed. Japan rebuilt. The world entered an uneasy peace. And in a tiny mountain village few maps bothered to name, life went on exactly as it always had: quiet, watchful, untouched by time. Except for one thing. No one ever talked about the Americans. Not once. Not even in whispers. When post-war researchers began interviewing villages across Honshu, they expected stories of hunger, fear, and soldiers moving through night. But here, when asked about August 1945, elders fell silent. Eyes dropped, lips tightened. Some simply stood and walked away. Others muttered a single phrase: "Do not go to the forest." A former farmer, one of the last living men old enough to remember, refused photographs, refused documents, but finally spoke one sentence before retreating into his house and closing the door without another word: "They came here. We warned them. The mountain took them." No one knew what that meant. There were rumors, of course, of soldiers seen trudging toward the cedar woods, of villagers leaving offerings near the tree line, of Imperial troops digging tunnels into the earth and sealing them hurriedly near war's end. But every attempt to pin down detail dissolved in uncomfortable glances and abrupt silence. Scholars chalked it up to trauma. Locals called it respect for spirits older than memory. But one curious reporter visiting in the late 1960s recorded something unsettling in his notebook. "The forest feels alive, not metaphorically, alive. Something moves in the silence. Elders refuse to walk past a boundary marked only by stones." Decades later, hikers still avoid the area. Not because of superstition, they insist, but because the land doesn't want visitors. Missing dogs, nighttime cries echoing down ravines, strange lights flickering between trunks. And through all the silence, one truth lingered like mist in the cedar air. 12 American Marines entered those woods. No one in the village ever saw them leave. And somewhere beneath roots and moss, the mountain still holds whatever story they left behind. Military archives are meticulous by design. Every bullet issued, every ration opened, every soldier accounted for, which makes what happened on August 17, 1945 so unsettling. At 2:14 hours, One final transmission crackled through Allied listening posts across the Pacific Command network. It was brief, staticky, jagged like someone was fighting both the radio and the air itself. Command. This is Patrol Echo. Forest. Movement. Repeating movement. Under. The recording fractures there. What follows has been debated for decades. A sudden burst of static, a thump like a microphone striking earth, and a scream. Not a battle cry, not a grunt of pain, but something raw, primal, terrified. Then silence. Operators repeated calls for nearly an hour. No reply, no coordinates, no trace. At dawn, a retrieval patrol was drafted on paper but never deployed. A handwritten margin note on the mission slip reads only, "Stand down, war ending, do not escalate." 1 week later, Japan surrendered. In the overwhelming tide of victory reports and end-of-war announcements, 12 Marines simply disappeared into bureaucracy. Their status: Kia MIA. Cause: hostile conditions. Location: undisclosed. No funerals, no press releases, no letters home explaining the truth. Their families received folded flags and carefully worded condolences. Your son served with honor. His sacrifice will never be forgotten. But the war machine was already switching gears, shifting from destruction to reconstruction. Ghosts of unfinished stories had no place in the new world. Inside a locked storage vault beneath Fort Shafter in Hawaii, an operator's logbook still sits, edges yellowed, pages brittle. One entry, circled 3 times in fading pencil, stands out. Strange sound before transmission cut. Not gunfire, not explosion. Sounded, wet, heavy, like earth splitting. Another note below, hastily scratched. We aren't supposed to ask. And so the last trace of Patrol Echo faded into classified drawers and dusty records. Official history forgot them. Their families mourned without answers. But deep in the mountain village across the ocean, the old forest waited. Silent, ancient, and very much awake. The war faded into textbooks and grainy documentaries. Veterans grew old. The world turned electric, modern, fast. Yet history has a way of leaving breadcrumbs for those stubborn enough to follow them. In 1987, Dr. Miles Whitaker, a meticulous historian obsessed with obscure Pacific Theater deployments, stumbled upon a misfiled requisition form in the National Archives. It listed rations for a Marine patrol that had never been recorded returning. Curious, he dug deeper. What he found didn't match war records. It contradicted them. There were letters, tucked inside a forgotten personnel binder, unsent, unread, never delivered. Each one written in hurried script, each page creased like the writer folded it under stress. Dated August 1945. Corporal Ellis wrote, "Villagers watch us, won't meet our eyes. They leave food at forest edge at dusk, shapes in trees. Thought it was nerves, not so sure." Another from Lance Corporal Reyes. "Something in ground last night. Earth moved, not quake, like something pushing up from below." And then a final, smudged note from PFC Harlan. Same handwriting as the diary entry, long rumored but never authenticated. "We hear it under us. Lieutenant says keep patrol calm, but it's closer every day. Forest, not empty. Soil, not still." Whitaker brought the letters to military liaisons. Doors shut. Files disappeared from shelves he'd accessed only weeks before. A polite but firm warning followed. "Let history rest, Doctor." But history doesn't rest. Not when 12 names vanish into dirt. Not when letters whisper about movement beneath roots and soil that breathes. Whitaker visited the village. Locals turned him away. Old men made warding signs. A woman, hair silver and eyes clouded, whispered a phrase he never forgot. They woke the sleeping earth. The mountain keeps what it is owed. No bodies, no graves, just paper, ink, and fear pressed between them like dried leaves. And so the truth remained in fragments, words written by trembling hands in a war's final hours. Hints of lights drifting between ancient cedars, of footsteps at night that didn't belong to any man, of rumbling beneath beds where Marines slept uneasy. Letters that spoke not of battle, but of something older, watching, waiting, hungry beneath the soil. Long before soldiers marched here, before radio wires hummed through valleys and the world knew the word atomic, the villagers had another name for the forest that swallowed the Marines. To outsiders it meant nothing. To those born beneath its shadow it meant everything. Kage no Mori, the Shadow Grove. Children were warned never to cross the moss-lined stones. Farmers left offerings at the tree line in spring, and on certain moonless nights, older residents shut shutters tight and whispered prayers to gods long abandoned by city shrines. Local folklore told of yokai drifting through cedar fog, pale figures wandering after dusk, calling by name those foolish enough to listen. "You hear your mother's voice," one elderly woman told a visiting researcher, "in the 1,950 seconds. But it is not your mother." Another legend spoke of soldiers from older wars drifting through the woods, armor clinking softly, eyes hollow, forever lost. But the most unsettling tale took root late in the war years. A rumor of Imperial Army engineers carving tunnels deep beneath the mountain, hollows for radio bunkers and weapons stores the public never knew existed. When Allied planes roared overhead near war's end, the entrances were sealed, not with timbers or stone, but with ritual and fear. Villagers spoke of conscripted laborers who never returned, of engineers who went mad hearing the earth breathe at night. But whenever outsiders pressed for detail, the same soft denial surfaced. There is no tunnel. There was never a garrison. Nothing happened here. Yet, at dusk, the villagers' eyes shifted toward the trees, toward that line where ground turned too dark, too quiet, where cicadas stopped singing, and wind refused to enter. One surviving temple record contains a curious note dated the 12th of August 1945, written in careful brush strokes. "Strangers came. We warned them. The doors below have teeth." Modern historians dismiss the line as poetic superstition, but locals still refuse to hunt there, still refuse to cut timber there, still leave rice by the stones once a month without fail. Whatever sleeps beneath the cedars, they say, does not forget, and it does not forgive. In 1992, a thin, stooped man with nicotine-stained fingers and trembling hands sat across from a documentary researcher in a Kyoto nursing home. His name was Satoru Inoue, once an engineer in the Imperial Army's Mountain Division. He had been silent for nearly half a century, until his lungs began failing and dreams of dark tunnels returned. "We built things," he whispered, voice brittle as old paper, "things not on maps." The interviewer thought he meant supply depots, ammunition caches, but Inoue shook his head. "No, orders direct from Tokyo, no records, no stamps. We were told the Americans must never find them. Structures hidden in the belly of the mountain, some for radio. Some," he trailed off, eyes distant, as if staring through decades of soil and stone. "Some for listening, not for us, for others." Pressed for clarity, he described narrow passages bored with primitive drills, reinforced chambers, and an entrance disguised as a natural break in the rock. "We poured concrete at war's end, locked it forever, but one door, one was never sealed, was never reported." His voice cracked. "I begged them. I told them it hurt us digging, the walls, they moved sometimes." The researcher laughed nervously then, thought the old man confused. But Inoue gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "It was not a bunker," he hissed. "It was older than us. We only opened what was already there." When Inoue died 3 weeks later, hospital staff found a folded scrap in his bedside drawer, a sketched map of ridges, a circle marking a depression in the forest, and 3 kanji scrawled beneath, "Never open again." His family burned the paper in accordance with his written instructions. But the researcher, shaken by the encounter, had already copied it in his notebook. He filed the interview away, dismissed by colleagues, forgotten in archives. Until 30 years later, when hikers reported strange vibrations beneath cedar roots after heavy rain, until a storm eroded a hillside near the Forbidden Woods, and beneath the earth, concrete cracked, metal glinted, and a black opening yawned like a mouth remembering how to breathe. History tends to swallow its quiet tragedies, but sometimes the earth gives reminders. After the hillside collapse exposed a concrete scar near the Shadow Grove, Whispers reached Tokyo universities, then Pacific War research forums, then the U.S. Marine Corps Historical Division. Soon, a small but determined joint research team assembled. Not soldiers, not treasure hunters, archivists, forensic anthropologists. A retired JSDF liaison who still believed some ghosts wore uniforms. And one American colonel whose grandfather's name appeared in a forgotten Marine roster, tucked in a folder stamped simply, "Missing." They arrived in the mountain village in early autumn, when fog clung low and rice paddies shimmered like mirrors broken by wind. The elders were not welcoming. They stood in clusters outside the community hall, weathered faces expressionless, hands gripping prayer beads like lifelines. The head priest stepped forward first. No smile, no greeting. Only a quiet plea. "Do not disturb the mountain. Leave the past where it sleeps." The colonel bowed respectfully but did not yield. "There are families waiting for answers." The priest's gaze flickered, a brief shadow of sympathy. Then resignation. "Then you must sign," he said. He produced a scroll of rice paper inscribed with kanji prayers and warning symbols older than written records. The team signed out of respect, though none understood the oath. "Walk with humility," the priest murmured, "and if you hear voices that sound familiar, do not answer them." The researchers trekked toward the forest edge, watched by villagers who did not wave. No one offered tea, no curious children followed. Only silence, and the soft thud of dirt beneath boots. When the tree line approached, the wind died as if the forest held its breath. Cicadas ceased. Even leaves seemed to hang motionless. The lead anthropologist paused. "Feels colder," she whispered. The colonel checked his compass. The needle quivered, then spun twice before settling. Cameras flickered. Static bled through radios, though the sky above was clear. They reached the storm-torn slope just before dusk. Mud still damp, roots twisted like knotted fingers, concrete glowing pale beneath torn moss. A lone crow perched above, staring without blinking. The priest's warning echoed unbidden in their minds, but scientific curiosity, once ignited, rarely extinguishes. The colonel exhaled. "Tomorrow we open it." Somewhere deeper in the woods, something shifted. Branches rustled without wind. And far beyond sight, the mountain listened. Morning broke gray and breathless. Mist clung low, making every trunk seem doubled, every shadow stretched. The team gathered at the exposed slope, tools in gloved hands, headlamps strapped tight though sunlight filtered through branches. The colonel approached first, brushing away damp moss. Beneath it, a sheet of rusted steel, rivets eaten by time, a recessed handle frozen in place. Japanese characters were carved into the concrete above the frame. Old, uneven, done in haste. Fonji Releshadao, the sealed path. But beneath them, faint and scratched by a different hand, English letters, USMC, not stamped, carved as if with a bayonet tip. The anthropologist traced the marks gently. "They were here." Her voice trembled. "They really were here." The archivist snapped photographs, hands unsteady. "American and Imperial both," he murmured. "No record of joint fortification anywhere in this region." One researcher pressed a stethoscope to the door out of morbid curiosity. He flinched. "It's warm." The others laughed uneasily until they touched the metal themselves. Cold morning air, chilled skin, yet the steel radiated faint heat, like something beneath breathed slow, patient breath. They cleared mud, pried vines away, cut roots that clung like tendons. And then, in the silence between tool strikes, a low vibration hummed beneath their feet. Not enough to shake the earth. Enough to feel in bone. Enough to make a camera lens briefly blur as if the air thickened. With a final heave, the handle broke free. The door groaned, not like metal, but like earth exhaling after decades. A pungent scent drifted out. Damp soil, rust, a whisper of old sweat, and something else, metallic, sweet, ancient. Someone gagged softly. Lights flicked on. Beams cut into darkness beyond a short concrete corridor reinforced with rotting timber. A faded American stencil clung to one wall. Echo 3. Opposite, black Japanese paint warned, "Leet root ginger, do not enter." The colonel lifted his radio. "We've located the bunker. Entry confirmed. Proceeding." Static answered. Then, a faint crackle. A whisper? No. Breath maybe. The radio fell silent again. Behind them, far back at the village edge, bells chimed somberly. Not celebration. Warning. Mourning. The priest stood alone at the shrine gate, eyes closed, whispering prayers into cold air. Deep in the darkness, a drip echoed, then another, then a soft, rhythmic sound like something shifting in soil. Alive, waiting. The bunker swallowed light like a living thing. Headlamps cut thin beams through drifting dust, illuminating walls ribbed with rotting timber braces and rust-eaten pipes that dripped steadily, each droplet echoing like a heartbeat. The air was stale, heavy, thick, with the taste of old metal and forgotten fear. They moved in slow formation, professional but uneasy, boots crunching on gravel that hadn't shifted since 1945. The first chamber revealed itself like a memory unsealed. Stacked crates collapsed into splinters, ration cans half-rotted, labels clinging by threads. U.S. markings intermingled with imperial stamps. Two armies that never should have occupied the same room. A map pinned to the wall, water-stained beyond recognition, corners curled like burned parchment. Further in, a pair of boots sat upright in the dust, leather decayed, laces disintegrating into powder. Inside lay only emptiness. A torn scrap of olive-drab cloth clung to a nail nearby, and half-buried beneath rubble, the frayed edge of an American flag peeked out. One researcher bent to touch it, and the fabric disintegrated under his glove like ash. Strange carvings marked the concrete. Not Japanese engineering notes, not marine tally marks, something else. Lines spiraled, intersecting in uneven patterns, symbols gouged deep, as though carved by desperate hands or something with no regard for flesh or bone. A metal cup lay on its side near a rusted radio set. The microphone cord was snapped as if ripped mid-call. The colonel crouched beside it, fingers brushing the surface. "They tried to transmit," he murmured. His voice was swallowed instantly, devoured by the bunker's breathless depth. They pressed forward, hall narrowing. A sensation built pressure behind the eardrums, an almost inaudible hum vibrating in the bones, like the mountain was speaking in frequencies meant for no human ear. The camera operator whispered, "Does anyone else hear that?" No one answered, not because they didn't, but because the sound threaded through thought itself, drowning language. When they reached the junction, the air turned frigid. Condensation formed on helmet lamps. The anthropologist held up her hand and froze. There, on the floor, smeared in faded brown, boot prints. American issue, leading deeper. And beside them, a second set, bigger, uneven, toes pointed inward like an animal learning to walk upright. The radio crackled again. A single hollow whisper drifted through. Echo. For a moment, no one breathed. They found it in the third chamber, half buried beneath a collapsed beam and a tangle of rusted wire. A leather-bound notebook, edges warped, pages swollen but intact, preserved by the bunker's cold air and stillness. The colonel lifted it with surgical gloves, as if afraid it might vanish like a ghost touched too suddenly. On the inside cover, in shaky pencil, PFC Daniel Harlan, Echo Patrol. The first entries were ordinary, notes on supply counts, complaints about humidity, observations about villagers avoiding eye contact, and then a line that sent a chill across every spine present. "They know we are here. They watch from trees. Not soldiers, not people." Next page. "Heard something under the dirt last night. Lieutenant says rodents. Doesn't sound like rodents." Then a drawing, rough, charcoal smudged, a forest, and beneath it, long shapes twisting under soil like worms the size of men. Another entry, Reyes vanished during watch. No struggle, no sound. One moment beside me, next moment gone. Found his rifle upright in mud. Further down, handwriting deteriorated. Lines slanted. Words bled into each other. Voices in tunnel. Not Japanese, not English. Sound like us, but not us. Sergeant Mathers answered one. I told him not to. He followed down corridor, never came back. Villagers left offerings at tree line. rice, salt, a knife. They know. They always knew. The final page was smeared, graphite broken under pressure, as if written with shaking hands in darkness. Door below, wasn't built by men. We opened it. Something moved. Soil breathing. Ground alive. If we leave, it follows. If we stay, it waits. A final line, nearly illegible. Do not dig. Do not listen. Do not answer the voices. The colonel closed the book slowly. His jaw clenched. My grandfather was Echo Company, he whispered. His last letter home ended like this. How? Someone asked. He wrote. The colonel swallowed. Said the ground felt awake. The bunker exhaled again, a long, low groan like stone shifting against bone. Dust fell from the ceiling in a slow, drifting rain. Gravel trembled underfoot. Something moved deeper inside. Heavy, slow, burrowing, listening. No one wanted to believe what the blueprints suggested. At first glance, they looked like standard wartime schematics, water-stained parchment, edges crumbling, Japanese engineering notes scrawled in neat, hurried brushstrokes. But when the archivist carefully unfolded the final fragment, a second layer of lines emerged beneath the first. American grid codes, English labeling, corridor notations matching marine mapping standards. Two systems, two planners, two enemies, designing the same subterranean space. This isn't possible, one historian breathed. There were no joint facilities. Not here, not anywhere. Yet the lines told a different story. Not a bunker, a network, chambers branching in jagged asymmetry, angles far too irregular for ordinary fortification. A central room marked only with a single character, Chol prisoner. Beside it, faint English pencil strokes, holding an interrogation. The room wasn't large enough for troops, but it was large enough for one terrified person and a handful of guards, a site where soldiers who never should have met questioned the same secret. An imperial seal stamped one corner. Opposite, nearly invisible under grime, a U.S. Naval Intelligence watermark. History books insist Japan and the United States never cooperated in the dying days of the war. But here in the belly of a mountain, the truth seemed stranger. Two governments quietly trying to understand something older than their conflict, something neither side could control. A smaller sketch was taped to the back, crude, drawn by shaking hand. A pit ringed with torches, shapes in the dirt beneath a lattice of timber, human silhouettes? Or something crouched and uneven, limbs wrong, proportions wrong, a head too narrow and too long. Beneath it, one English phrase, "We didn't build it." A chill crawled the length of the corridor. The air felt heavier, as if the bunker itself bristled at being understood. The colonel whispered what everyone feared to say aloud. They found something here, and neither side wanted to face it alone. The lights flickered. Stone groaned. Something deep below shifted like earth remembering movement. History had been written to bury this place, and the mountain seemed eager to keep it that way. The smell hit first. Metallic, old, like rust and dried blood soaked into earth decades ago. Then they saw it. A widened chamber, ceiling collapsed inward, rock jagged like broken teeth. In the beam of a headlamp, a gleam brass shell casing scattered like forgotten prayers. American, 30-06. Japanese 6.5 millimeters Arisaka, fired inward toward the same point. Two armies, once enemies, standing side by side against something in the dark. Scratches gouged the steel doorframe, deep, frantic, some clearly fingernail marks, others carved with blades. One set impossibly high, 4 parallel lines raked across metal like claws dragged through butter. The metal wasn't bent outward, it was bent inward, as if something inside strained to escape. Near the far wall, bones, not laid to rest, scattered, a jawbone dusted white, ribs gnawed at their ends, a vertebra cracked as if crushed by immense pressure. No sign of burial rites, uniforms, rank patches, just the remains of men who fought a battle no one recorded and lost. The anthropologist knelt, breath trembling. These fractures, she murmured, not shrapnel, not collapse trauma. Compressed, as if squeezed, A faint engraving caught their eyes, low on the concrete, as if scratched by someone sitting with back to wall, writing their last words before whatever came. 4 desperate lines etched into stone until fingers bled. Don't let the dark take you. Beneath it, another hand had added something smaller, shakier. If it calls your name, run. Dust rained again from above. A slow rumble answered from deeper recess. The lights dimmed, then steadied, but the walls felt closer, breathing, listening. The colonel's jaw tightened. We've seen enough. We document and retreat. But the bunker did not agree. A distant echo rolled down the hall, metal striking stone or something dragging across earth. Not fast, not frantic, slow, patient, like a predator confident its prey had nowhere else to go. One researcher turned toward the sound and froze, eyes wide, breath shallow. "Did you hear it?" he whispered. "It sounded like someone whispering my name." The corridor behind them suddenly felt longer, darker, alive with a presence just out of sight, waiting for the lights to fail or for courage to break. And somewhere beneath their boots, the mountain shifted again. The fight that started in 1945 may not have ended at all. There is a logic to war graves, bodies buried where they fell, names etched in stone. But here, beneath the mountain, death hadn't been clean or honorable. It had been confused, panicked. Buried alive or dragged into darkness, no one could say which was worse. Forensic lights swept across the chamber and illuminated fractured beams and crushed helmets half buried in sediment. Soil packed tight like cement, as though the mountain had folded itself deliberately over the room. A collapsed ceiling? Yes, but not natural. The way the rock sheared, the angles of pressure, this had been forced. Something pushed from above, or surged from below. They found more journal scraps in a rusted tin, pages damp but legible, edges eaten by mold. Harlan's handwriting again, degrading from neat cursive to jagged scratch. Tunnel shifted again. Ceiling breathing? Mathers gone. Found his helmet, still warm. Reyes heard voices. Said they were calling him by name. Voices sounded like us but wrong. The final scrawls were more frantic. Words jammed together, punctuation abandoned, graphite pressed so hard the page tore. Not quake. Something under dirt moving. Like a tide. Soil alive. We heard knocking, not ours. The last sentence, barely readable, dragged across the paper like the pencil snapped mid-stroke. We are not alone down here. Next to it, smeared fingerprints, not black from ink, but dark, crusted with dust and something else metallic brown. The anthropologist whispered, these weren't written by someone sitting calmly. Another beam shifted overhead, dust plumed. A low groan rolled through the tunnels like breath in a chest too large to be human. The walls vibrated. The colonel snapped shut the book. We're leaving now. But as they turned, a soft sound tickled the air. Not movement. Not shifting rock. A human sound. A muffled sob, very faint, echoing up a tunnel sealed decades ago. Everyone froze. Radios hissed. Lamps flickered. Then, just under the fading light, a whisper crawled along the corridor, thin as thread, trembling, pleading, please, help. A voice impossibly familiar, as if recorded by the bunker itself and released after 80 years. Harlan? Mathers? A mimic? The mountain held its breath. The team didn't. Silence followed them home. Long flights. Sleepless nights. No one spoke of what they heard. No one wanted to. Some things feel heavier when spoken aloud. Some truths rot in air. Back in Washington, the colonel walked into the archives expecting dust and bureaucracy. Instead, he found a file waiting on a table as though someone knew he was coming. A tan envelope sealed in wax, brittle with age, stamped, confidential. Joint Pacific Incident, do not disseminate. Inside was a single report. No header, no signatures. Typewritten statements, lines redacted not with black ink, but scraped away by razor blade decades ago. Enough remained to read the bones of it. Imperial engineers encountered subterranean anomaly. Joint temporary cooperation authorized to contain unknown threat. Subjects not hostile at first. Contact, hostile after excavation continued. Containment failure. Unit Echo lost. Another line, nearly erased. Do not allow excavation in region again. If discovered, deny. Seal. Pray. Attached was a transcript from an unnamed Japanese officer, recorded weeks after surrender. We woke something older than the war. We tried to bury it. The Americans tried to understand it. Both failed. And a note from a U.S. intelligence observer scrawled in the margin. Recommend permanent suppression. If public learns what lives beneath, panic. When the colonel asked where the rest of the archive was, the clerk looked confused. Sir, that envelope has been sealed since 1947. There is no rest. The file is supposed to be empty. Aubrey. But it wasn't. Someone left it for him. Someone else wanted it forgotten. He walked out into D.C. sunlight feeling watched. A shadow passed across the marble corridor behind him, disappearing before he turned. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. No message. Just the sound of faint static, wet, crawling, almost breathing. From 8,000 miles away, deep beneath a Japanese mountain, something had been disturbed, and it had not stayed buried quietly. It took months before the remains recovered could be matched. DNA cross-referenced with aging military files, dental fragments compared to wartime enlistment charts, yellowed with time. At last, 12 names rose again from silence. Men who vanished without graves, without closure, without their final chapter. Now they would go home. Ceremonies were held in quiet cemeteries from Ohio to California. Folded flags pressed into trembling hands. Bugles cried. Taps floated into sky like an apology 80 years overdue. Generations who never met these men wept as if they had. Their sacrifices were finally acknowledged, their absence finally recognized. But even as families found closure, the mountain did not. The village did not celebrate. No lanterns, no prayers for the fallen. Doors shut early, windows shuttered before dusk. The priest rang a low bell at twilight, not in mourning, but warning. "We do not disturb what sleeps," he said when reporters asked, "and we do not pretend it has left." Tourists began to arrive, drawn by rumor and forbidden curiosity. Some left offerings of coins and incense at the forest boundary after hearing what locals refused to say. Others ignored the warnings. Hikers who wandered too near the sealed slope returned pale, shaken. One claimed he heard footsteps behind him, padding lightly in the dirt, matching his pace. When he turned, nothing but cedar trunks and mist. Another described soft whispers drifting through branches, like old radio static calling names he didn't recognize. A third swore he saw lantern light weaving between trees. But the light moved wrong, too smooth, too deliberate, not bouncing like a human hand would. Night after night, strange flickers glowed deep beyond the moss stones, never crossing the border but never fading entirely. Search teams sent once returned quiet, offering no comment. No further expeditions were authorized. On clear evenings, the wind rolls down the mountain like a low sigh. Sometimes it sounds like voices layered over each other, pleading, warning, remembering. Sometimes it sounds like earth shifting just beneath roots, patient and restless at once. The official record calls what happened a wartime anomaly, a tragedy of lost patrols and collapsed tunnels. But those who have stood near the Shadow Grove know truths rarely fit neatly into reports. Was it secrecy? Betrayal between enemies briefly united by fear? Or did the Marines disturb something older than borders, older than war, older than human memory? The forest does not answer. It only watches, and beneath the ground, something still breathes in the dark. This story was intense, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.